Hello and welcome to this week's video. If you're new here, hi, my name is Camille. I'm a foreigner, expat, immigrant, whatever you want to call me, living in Seoul, South Korea, and I like to talk about it on the internet. Sometimes I talk about my friends, sometimes I daily vlog, and other times I talk about applying for non-teaching jobs, which is, I guess, what we're doing today. Today I'm going to be talking about the thing that people ask me about the most out of anything else. Like, not just in terms of applying for non-teaching jobs, like this is the question I get asked the most on every single social platform that I'm on, and like even when people come up to me in the street. If people came up to me in the street, I mean, I guess they would ask me this, but it has never actually happened. And what that thing is a resume. So I don't know why this happens, why people feel like their resume has to be extremely different than what they may use in North America, but obviously, it's something that you guys want to hear about, so I'm happy to share my tips or things that I think will make you stand out when you're applying to non-teaching jobs in Korea. Before I even want to get started, a lot of these things are really just good ways to improve any resume, regardless of what job you're applying to in whatever country, but some of them are more attuned to the South Korean job market. In my experience, it's really not that different than the North American market hold for a couple of things. So if you already have a resume that is, you know, putting in the work for you and doing a good job in a North American, European, Australian market, maybe I should say Western market, it's probably gonna do a good job here as well. There's just a few things that you might wanna update or think about when you do decide to start applying in South Korea. So that's what this really is. Now, if you're curious what makes me qualified, that is a fabulous question. I did successfully apply for and get and retain and become promoted within the South Korean job market, non-teaching job market, as a non-Korean speaking professional. So for those of you who don't know, I work in PR. I used to work as an editor, which means I would write English content, everything from press releases to speeches to video scripts to long format articles to social copy to influencer marketing packages, like pretty much anything you can think of under the umbrella of marketing. If a Korean company wanted it output in English, that could fall under my job responsibilities as an editor. I no longer do that though. I have been promoted to an account manager, so now I service our English speaking clients. So I do things like communication strategy, performance media. I now manage editors on my team, and I'm also responsible for a couple of juniors as well, which is pretty cool. So that is what I do if you are curious, and this is what I did to my resume to make those opportunities possible. So I've whittled today's tips down into 5 main points, and of course these are things that are likely to help you get to the next stage of a job application process, get you in the room to interview in South Korea, but also they're just generally good resume tips. So some of these things you might think, that doesn't really sound specific to Korea, and I've done that, not intentionally, but it's true that a lot of these things are just generally good practice for resumes. Now, the first one may seem like a no-brainer, but actually I get asked this question a lot, and I do understand where people are coming from, and that question that I get asked, which inspired the first tip, is, should I write a Korean resume? And of course, the people who are asking me this are non-Korean speakers. And my answer will always be no. And the reason for that is twofold. So first of all, if you're not a confident Korean speaker, especially if you don't have business level Korean, if you write your resume, it will be very clear to a native speaker or someone who has, you know, TOEIC 6 fluency in business Korean. It'll be really immediately obvious to them that you're not at that level to be able to communicate in business Korean. So if they are looking for someone, it will automatically disqualify you. The other way is obviously if you get someone else to write it for you. And I think this is more what people are asking about because they want to make their resume accessible to an interviewer who may not speak English. And while that is very kind of you, it ends up being a misrepresentation of your skill, and it's also not setting you up for success if you do land the role, or you go into the interview and then suddenly the interview is happening in Korean, and again, it becomes painfully obvious that you can't communicate or you won't be able to work. So they're either gonna be able to tell right away, or it's gonna be a misrepresentation of your skill, which is like the biggest no-no ever in a job application. You wanna be very real with your level of accomplishment and what you can do. So best just not write a Korean resume. What I will say is that if you are looking to work in a Korean office and you want to integrate into Korean society, which I'm assuming you do if you live in the country and you want to be a part of the community, then I'm gonna assume that you're taking Korean lessons. And if you are taking Korean lessons, no matter what level you're at, I would put that in the education section of your resume, 100% without fail. So I was a self-learner, which I know lots of people are, when I applied to this job. So I was doing the Talk to Me in Korean curriculum. I put what book I was on in my education section to show that I was actively learning Korean. And then it came up on my interview and I was able to talk about the fact that I was learning and how I would approach like any situation in the office where I necessarily couldn't communicate with the person I was working with, which does happen. Some of my accounts that I wrote for, I don't write for them as much anymore as an account manager, but the client only spoke Korean, the internal team only ever spoke to me in Korean, and I'm ever so thankful to Microsoft Teams for integrating translation features into Teams, but you know, that's obviously something that you're gonna run into. And so I talked about how I would best problem solve in that scenario, and it came up because obviously it was on my resume. It probably would have come up in the conversation anyways, but they did point out that it was on my resume, so it's a good thing to put it there. If you are in like a specific program, then I would put that level on there, obviously. So now if I were to be applying to jobs, which I'm not, but if I was, I would remove the Talk to Me in Korean level in my education section, and I would replace it with the level of KIP I'm in, which is level 2. Next up is to include a photo. And before we even get into this, this is probably the most, well, the first point and this are probably the most Korea-specific tips on this list. In several Western countries, including Canada, it's actually illegal to ask for things like photos during the interviewing process, because that can ultimately lead to a bias in terms of who you may hire or who you may consider for the role. But in Korea, oftentimes pictures are right on the resume. That's not a strange practice here. Not everybody does it, but a lot of Koreans and foreigners will put their picture on their resume. I have my picture on my resume as well. And even if it's not there, throughout the application process, someone could ask you for it, so you should be prepared with a professional headshot. Mine was on my resume, as I said, but even when I was applying for my Hagwon job, I had a picture of myself on my resume, and the school still asked for more pictures of me, which is interesting. They were like, yeah, we want to see like, you know, a comfortable photo of you like with your friends doing whatever. And I was like, okay. So be prepared with a professional headshot. And if you're in Korea, then you might already know this. There's a couple ways to get one if you are not prepared with a professional headshot. So one would be, in a lot of subway stations, there are these like photo booths which people use for passport photos, for like little ID photos. And if you want, that would be the most cost-effective route to getting a more professional headshot. I know you're like, a photo booth, that's not professional, but trust me, they turn out like pretty good photos. But if you want something a little bit more premium, there are also tons of photo studios that specialize in this sort of thing, because every few years, people will refresh their professional headshot. And if you go to one of these photo studios, prices can range anywhere from like 30 to 80 bucks. And these ones are nice as well because they'll Photoshop you. But be prepared to have a conversation, because it's likely they will over Photoshop you. I'm sure we've all heard those stories of people who get passport photos done and then it looks like nothing like them. Now we're getting into some of the more general tips. So tip number 3 is actually to keep it to 1 page. No one is out here reading a 2-page resume. If it's got a staple, no. I mean, I guess you could do it double-sided. Skills of being concise or being able to summarize information are skills that you need to work in an office, especially if you're gonna work in marketing and communication. So you should be able to summarize your experience in a way that it fits all on one page. Also, remembering that you are delivering this to a team of people that may not all be proficient English speakers, it's best to just keep things simple. It might even land in the hands of someone who speaks no English at all, and if it is written simply and they are very passionate about getting to learn about you, then that sort of concise, simple bullet point they can always put into Papago, whereas if it's something more wordy, it's gonna be a lot more difficult. So instead of using words like, what's a good example? Like, for example, if you're talking about the fact that you ran a social channel and you grew the followers, just say that. Say you grew the number of followers from X to Y, instead of saying that you applied foundational strategy in community management to expand the audience of digital platforms or native-owned digital, like whatever it is. You know, when we add all these buzzwords, particularly if you work in communications and marketing, just don't do that. You grew the number of followers. That's enough. And then tell them how much. My biggest pet peeve when I look at a resume is when I don't actually see a measurable communication of someone's impact. That was a weird way to say that, but like, I wanna know what impact you had, because if you just say, I grew followers on the account, okay, but how much? That could be like one follower, right? Or if you say you managed budgets, especially if you're applying for an account role, tell me loosely how much, because there's a certain level of skill and experience required to manage budgets of 0 to 6 figures versus budgets in the millions. So if you just say you managed a budget, that could be $10. I don't know, it's probably not, but if you managed a budget in the millions, say that. That's sick. Okay, that was just an aside. It's just a personal pet peeve when I read resumes. And also, obviously, I understand sometimes you can't talk about like budget specific things, but just FYI, you can put a range, so just put a range. Okay, moving on. My tip number 4 is to write a cover letter. And I know everybody hates writing cover letters, but they are actually quite common in Korea. Sometimes they'll be called a self-introduction. Do it. Write the cover letter and make it specific to the job you are applying for. I cannot stress this enough. I know it's an extra step and you just want to be able to have one version of your resume and shoot it out like to the world, but that's just not going to be as successful as taking your time to write your cover letter to accompany that resume specifically to the job and to use words from the job description directly in your cover letter. That is the biggest absolute must do when you're applying for jobs. Sorry, anyways, wow, I feel very passionately about cover letters, but they are popular in Korea. They'll usually be a part of your application package. It will specifically say that they require a self-introduction. This is where you can be more specific and more detailed about the work that you did. So resumes are usually bullet pointed. Sorry, another thing, do not write paragraphs as your job description. Write bullets. This will help you be more concise. And then you can focus in on specific cases from your work experience and write paragraphs about them in a way that makes them relevant to the job you're applying for in your cover letter, while also speaking to why you are in the job market and what you are looking for from your future employer. And the last tip is specifically for anybody who is currently working as a teacher or is thinking about working as a teacher and then transitioning to a non-teaching job. Do not leave teaching off your resume. I know it can seem like, why would I add this? It has nothing to do with what I would do in the office. And it does really feel like an aside, obviously. But first of all, if you remove it, then you'll have a gap in your employment experience, which is not great. But also don't discredit that experience, because sure, it doesn't feel like what you did in a classroom on a day-to-day basis might be applicable to what you are going to be doing in an office, but I personally think it absolutely is. So you can talk about certain skills and make them transferable. So for example, I was coming from Hagwon and I have client management experience, and that's ultimately what I wanted to get back to you know, once I served time as an editor. That sounds weird, but so I spoke about I kind of changed the wording around what I did at the Hagwon, which was essentially be a parent pleaser. And instead of saying parents, I said clients, and I wrote about it in a way that was like, you know, let me look up what I said. Give me a minute. Because I feel like this could be helpful. I'm looking it up because I feel like this could definitely be helpful to people who are in teaching jobs and want to apply to non-teaching jobs. I said, collaborated with Korean and foreign partners to maintain strong academy enrollment and client satisfaction. You see how immediately me doing everything I could to make parents happy and basically doing whatever my Hagwon boss told me to became a transferable skill. So don't leave it off your resume. Put it on there. The other reason why you want to put it on there is because it sends a good signal, especially if you've been at the school for more than a year, that you are someone who is more integrated into Korean society. I think it can be difficult if you are applying from home and you want to come here and have your first job be an office job, or if you have not been in Korea long, it makes it more difficult to kind of convince them of your permanency. Because it does take a little bit of time to get comfortable here. So if you can show them that you are indeed comfortable here because you have lived here for a certain number of years, that's gonna be a big check mark for them and give them less stress or worry about you potentially having a hard time fitting in or getting comfortable in the country and departing earlier than originally planned. Okay, that's it. Those are my top 5 tips, ladies and gentlemen. Those are things that I did to my resume before and while I was applying to Korean jobs to help make me more appealing in the Korean job market. Because obviously a resume is only one piece of the process. It gets you in the door to have a conversation. Korean interviews are a whole different topic. I was looking for a more creative way to say that, but anyways, if you are interested in hearing me talk about my interviewing experience and maybe give some tips on how you can interview better in a Korean job application environment, let me know. Leave a comment below and maybe we can turn this into a series. Oh, maybe, you know what? Maybe I could talk about vetting job posts too. If you're interested in either of those videos, if you're interested in me talking about interviewing tips or how to vet job posts on platforms like peopleandjob.com, then let me know in the comments below and maybe I will be able to turn this into a series. If there's anything else that you think of that you want me to talk about, then just let me know. It makes, honestly, when you leave comments about things that you guys want to know, it makes my life a lot easier. So please leave video ideas for me. God, I'm a terrible creator. I can't come up with my own content. Cheers! I will see you next week, and if you are currently applying for jobs in Korea, I wish you the best of luck. And maybe I'll see you at the next mixer. There's no mixer. Should we have an E7 mixer at Thursday party? Not at Thursday party. Okay, I'll shut up now. See you next week. Bye.